You're watching The Pulse, your weekly guide to global health on Al Jazeera. I'm Shireen El-Feki. Thalidomide is one of the nightmares of modern medicine. This drug has been a source of pain, disability, and birth defects for tens of thousands of people around the world. But now, thalidomide is back, this time to treat a range of diseases, including cancer. But is a drug with this sort of history really worth resurrecting? The Pulse took a look at the return of an unlikely therapy. Thalidomide is a drug with an appalling history. 50 years ago, thousands of disabled babies were born to mothers who took it on their doctor's advice. In Europe and America, the drug was banned.
Thousands of babies were born with missing limbs and internal deformities. We need to educate people about the damage that thalidomide and other similar drugs can cause.
Now a new version of thalidomide is available, offering hope to blood cancer patients. Downtown New York. Paul Nichols is at his daily workout. 3 years after starting a new life in the United States, Paul was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a cancer that attacks the body's blood cell factory, the bone marrow. The disease can spread quickly through the body.
I didn't know what multiple myeloma was. I hadn't even bothered to check it out. So the first thing I do is get on the computer and I start to check it out. And everything I read was, it's a death sentence.
Gareth Morgan is one of the world's leading hematologists at London's Institute of Cancer Research. He's been treating myeloma for over 20 years.
Myeloma is a cancer of the blood. It's one of the most common types of these cancers. It's closely related to leukemia. The cells from this particular disorder live in the bone marrow, and they have a number of effects on the body. First of all, they punch holes in the bones, so people get a lot of bone pain. They make you anemic, and also they make you prone to infections.
Myeloma can be treated with chemotherapy. This kills off not only cancerous cells, but healthy ones too. So patients can also benefit from cell transplants, which replenish their damaged bone marrow. Such treatment helped Paul Nichols, at first.
In 2005, I relapsed. I was in a cab and I sneezed and I broke my ribs. And when I went to the hospital to have my ribs x-rayed, they picked up a lesion in the left scapula. The disease was back, and it was back big time.
Paul had yet another bone marrow transplant. Doctors managed to save him from disability, getting him into remission once again. The question was, for how long?
With standard chemotherapies, the average patient still only lives for between 2 to 3 years. So it's an area where we really do need to develop new treatments.
Thalidomide was not an obvious choice.
Thalidomide was put on the shelf for probably 20 or 30 years and was barely used. But then a patient asked a doctor in Little Rock, Arkansas, if they could try thalidomide as a treatment for their myeloma. Rather surprisingly, that patient went into a complete remission and was able to be discharged from hospital and had a very good outcome. So the doctors then tried thalidomide on another group of 10 patients, and 30 to 40% of those patients also got good remissions. So since that time, thalidomide has been widely used and has become the mainstay of treatment in a way for myeloma.
But thalidomide's history is hard to forget. FREDDIE ASTBURY is a disability rights activist and himself a thalidomide victim.
Obviously, my mother, like many, took the drug for morning sickness. She trusted the doctors, she thought everything was going to be okay. First, of course, nobody knew why we were being born the way we did. Then, obviously, doctors realised that there could be a link with the drug. just wait and see what
Victims
the
of the
response
original thalidomide disaster urge caution this time round.
could possibly evade. When we discovered in 1985 that thalidomide was reintroduced, of course our first impact was, let's get the drug banned. And then we started getting involved, meeting patients who originally only had a couple of months to live.
There you go. Nearly there.
It's nearly time to go home. So we then said, well, 1 minute, you know, who are we to tell them that they can't have an extra couple of years' life? We need to deal with this in a different way, and the way forward is guidelines. What we want to do is to stop any more babies being born with limb deformities.
As a result, there are now strict controls on the use of thalidomide in cancer therapy to ensure that women do not become pregnant during treatment. So far, the United States is the only country to license thalidomide for myeloma. Other countries, including many in Europe, are still in the process of approving it. The drug has changed Paul's life. It allowed him to run the 2006 New York Marathon, and now he's helping others fight cancer. Since his diagnosis, Paul has set up his own charity, Team Continuum.
Team Continuum is, in a way, my legacy, but it's now become my life. And the morale aspect of this is that I'm now 24/7, 365, actively involved in running Team Continuum and helping cancer patients deal with their diseases. And that's a huge morale boost for me personally.
Once we finally get our head around how to use this drug properly, I'm sure these patients will be well, with good quality of life, and hopefully we'll get to a stage where they'll die of old age or some other feature and not this disease.
Thalidomide is an extreme example of a growing trend in medicine, giving new life to old drugs. Joining me to discuss this approach is Joe Collier, an expert in medicines policy and a former professor at St. George's Medical School in London. Joe, thalidomide, yes, it's shown to be effective in multiple myeloma, but it has huge baggage. I mean, how wise is it to bring this drug back?
Well, it is wise in a way. There's a drug which no doubt has biological activity. We know that. After all, it wouldn't have caused the side effects it had, you know, short limbs and so on, had it not got biological activity. And the most important thing to do in a way is to harness that. It was abominably advertised years ago, but abominably used.
Misadvertised.
Misadvertised, yes, badly advertised for the wrong things. But it's no doubt got activity. And if we could find it, an activity for it, that would be wonderful. And it's possible that it's effective in tumours. It's quite possible. The trouble is people don't like its name, don't like its history. In a funny way, we should be teaching the world that things change, understandings change, insights change, and here's a drug that might work. After all, if you're using it in myeloma, the chances are a woman who has it won't get pregnant, or if it's an older man, they certainly won't get pregnant. So it can't cause the damage it did in the 1950s and 60s.
Now, the pharmaceutical industry prides itself on being on the cutting edge of science and innovation. So why is there this trend to go back to old drugs?
I think the public pride of the pharmaceutical industry is cutting-edge development, but in reality what they're very good at is making money. And they'll make money however, and if they can see a way of developing a drug for a new indication, for a new market, they'll do so. So I think the reality is what they're best at is business.
But also within pharmaceutical research and development there has been a slowing of the pipelines. So is that one of the reasons they're turning back?
It's very, very important indeed. There's a slowing of pipelines, new drugs are more difficult to come by. So what you need to do, you need to widen the indications. You need to widen either the indications or the market. So if you can sell it to other countries apart from the normal conventional West where there's a lot of money, and realise there's lots of money in middle class people all over the world, or if you can find a condition that wasn't being treated that can be treated and there's money to come back, then you're onto a winner as far as they're concerned. So broadening the market is very, very important for industry. Well,
it's not just for big pharma companies as well, because one sees other smaller companies taking on these drugs actually for diseases that affect poor populations as well.
Well, of course, that's part of the new development of the way the industry works. It's become clear now that small companies working on niche drugs, 1 or 2 drugs, may come across a winner. They may take an old drug, discover they've got certain effects, start doing research on them in those particular effects like Calarazar or some condition, and say, aha, I think we've got a new treatment here. And this is very, very important.
And also knowing that these older drugs have already been through safety testing,
Yep.
thalidomide excluded,
Yeah.
and so it actually lowers the risk for companies taking on these drugs
It
for other conditions.
it lowers the risk, it lowers the expense, and it's just as exciting.
So many of these drugs are off patent as
Yep,
well.
absolutely.
So
So
lowers
it's a
the
very
cost.
exciting area.
There's a question of finding a new indication for an old
Yep,
drug.
yep.
And sometimes people say, well, isn't that just creating a condition?
That's
what they call disease mongering.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's another dimension. You don't want society can do without that, where people discover there's a make people feel ill, therefore we'll treat the illness we've created. That you don't want, but that is part of what's going on. These new avenues, these new ideas of drug companies to make sure the companies can survive. New structures of drug companies. There's the whole structure of the pharmaceutical industry is changing. It won't be long before there are virtual companies, Mr. X in his office in nowhere land, producing drugs in his mind, then actually marketing it here, developing it there, manufacturing it somewhere, having a virtual arrangement. The whole world is changing as far as new drugs are concerned.
Well, on that note, thanks, Joe. Join us after the break when we look at progress in the fight against one of Africa's most feared diseases, sleeping sickness.